So, with your approach to trumpet, we've been on the education tip, so let's
Yeah.
stay for just a second,
All right.
just about the education, the way you approach teaching trumpet, because like I said, trumpet is life. So
Yes.
some people are just like, okay, here's how you do this. Here's how you play this etude. Here's how you play these
That
changes.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That
so
never
how
works.
how do you approach it?
My trumpet professor, I studied with William Fielder up at Rutgers. It was funny you mentioned Sean because we were roommates and, we came in together and, that's literally one of my best friends who also happens to be one of my favorite trumpet players. But we both studied with William Fielder for our graduate studies to get our master's degree. And the thing that the core of his teaching had to do with showing you things in a way that you could show him. Basically, I give instruction in a way that my students can teach me the same material. And that's how I know that they get a grip on it. But I guess also at the core of my teaching, where I think I might have deferred from our professor, I like to think that your playing is a combination of different teachings and different lessons and different theories that you come across. Because I don't think there's any, there's no one way to skin a cat, so to speak.
Right.
So for my students, I like to give them more of an explorative nature on the instrument, because the way Fielder, the way Prof would work with us, he would tell us to purposely figure out how to do things wrong so that we could figure out how to do them the right way. Right. Anytime he would point out bad habits, he would want us to recreate those habits and kind of over exaggerate so that you know exactly what's going on. Because the general concept with the trumpet is you can't see the mechanics that go into playing. Mm-hmm. A piano player can look at his fingers, the drummer can watch his hands, can fix his posture. But with trumpet, so much is internal that you have to get used to what it feels like to have both bad and good habits to know when something needs to be corrected.
Right.
And so it was a series of things, in terms of just learning what it really means to sing through the instrument, and all of that. You mentioned about life lessons, but it directly correlates with how you handle life, because when I say there's no one way, what you find in life is that a problem can have many different solutions. And that, we brought up COVID a second ago. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different ways to get to the right place. All right. There are different ways to get to the right place, but every single way involves some sort of action on your part. So when we're talking about trumpet playing, when we're talking about life, you could say that while you're playing, maybe the notes aren't sounding a certain way. There are so many different factors that go into your sound that's when you explore each thing individually. You decide, is it my air? Is it how I'm moving the air? Am I putting too much air into the instrument? Am I directing that wind appropriately? There are so many different things that make up the mechanics of playing, that with my students, I like to give them the opportunity to explore their own habits and realize what it is that they should maybe keep and what should go. And then every now and then, once I see them really start to develop their own and find their way, that's when I start to deal with it in a more technical aspect. Well, now that you've discovered that it takes wind to play the trumpet, let's discuss ways to build up your wind. Let's discuss different ways to move the wind that you built. And let's discuss how much of that wind is necessary to do the types of things that you want to do. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, the teaching philosophy is that you learn how to play the trumpet. And once you get to a certain level of proficiency, you should be able to play whatever type of music it is you want to play. So I don't consider myself trained jazz trumpeters or classical trumpeters or legit or whatever the little titles people like to put on the music. I think I'm going to show you how to play this instrument, and with all of the things that it takes to learn how to play and enjoy playing the instrument, that's going to guide you, hopefully, to whatever it is you do next. Because not everybody's even meant to be a musician that comes to my studio. But music is such an overarching term when you deal with the career of it all. So I'm like, man, you learn how to play this instrument properly, and there's no telling what the skills will do for you. But you have to take care of this thing for it to take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really great. I really love that philosophy. I use something similar to that. When I was a full-time martial arts instructor for a random martial arts studio for about 30 years.
Wow.
And, one of the things that I used to do in terms of problem solving for people, because so many of the things were the mistakes that you saw were external manifestations.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's not the problem. That was just,
exactly.
So trying to get to what's causing the problem. And that required me to actually try to get into the minds of people.
Yeah.
And when someone would have a problem doing something, I would find myself imitating them and trying to get my body to move like their body's moving, going, well, how do I have to think to make that happen? And then once I could get that, it's like, oh, this is why you're having that problem. Think about doing this movement in this way. And like, well, how can you read my mind? I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm just reverse engineering things.
Yeah.
And, and trying to teach people how to do that for themselves, because I think ultimately that's what we have to do if we want to make the most progress on whatever it is in life.
Right.
We have to learn how to be our own best teachers. We have to be our problem solver. And that requires the ability to look with a very kind of non-judgmental approach to what we're doing. It's not horrible. I mean, it's not what you want, but it's not the end of the world. So let's just get the emotions out of it, and let's just say, this is what I want. This is what I'm getting. How do I get these two to match up? So yeah, that's really deep. Now, I've had a number of conversations with people, both in real life and online and things like that. This is one of those topics that can create a lot of controversy. But it has to do with the three parts. At least this is my opinion. There are three parts to being a great trumpet player, and people tend to focus on the last two. I think the end of the chain is the horn. It's the equipment. It's the gear. Because that's the amplifier for what you're doing. Then the middle portion is, I think, where a lot of people also get stuck. It's the technique. So whether it be, the facility of the fingers, the articulation, and whether it be the range or any of those things, those are the things that give you the ability to more seamlessly express your music. But I think the thing that most people miss is that core principle, that most foundation thing, which is music is something that's going on in your head and in your heart.
Right.
And if this isn't right, then even if you have the best technique in the world or the best gear in the world, you're not going to be able to produce the best music, because music is emotion. Music is not just, a series of notes and a series of rhythms. Music, to be pure music, needs to be something that touches the heart. And if you don't have feeling, how can you ever hope to express feeling? If you don't have creative ideas, how can you ever hope to express this kind of new sound? So how do you approach the mental aspect of the development, the mental emotional aspect of development of playing the horn?
Yeah, so there is a level of maturity that comes with deciding that you have more control over things than you give yourself credit for. So when it comes to the instrument, one thing that I encourage them to understand is that there are things that happen. There are things that are habit, there are things that are instinct, and then there are things that you can actually control. Once they find, or I don't always even have to help with this, but once they find out which of these things they're doing instinctively, whether they be good or bad, once they figure out what those things are, it generally makes it into an easier transition for them to understand the control that they do have. Because oftentimes I'll tell the student, I was like, all right, I want you to play. Oh, okay, let's take it from a technical aspect. When you think of the Gordon method, the Clyde Gordon method, dealing with tongue level placement. I'll tell them, and this doesn't work for everyone, mind you, but I'll tell them, generally speaking, what you do with your tongue, we treat the tongue as like a fourth valve on the instrument. So what you do with your tongue is going to dictate how low or high you play. That could also dictate how loud you play. That could also dictate your actual tone. You could literally change your tone just by either flattening your tongue out or curling it up raising up the front end of the tone, raising up the back or the middle of it, all of that makes a huge difference. So now once you understand that you can control what notes you hit based upon what you say, once they get to that portion and realize if you say ah, you're going to play a pitch here. If you say E, then that arch, wherever it happens in your tongue naturally, is going to take you to a different pitch. Now let's control that by purposely saying ah and E. Now that you know where that pitch is when you say E, always say that, and you should always be able to get that note once you combine all the other elements. Once they start to get to that point, I think that creates a different kind of confidence level that helps them to develop the other things that come with the trumpet. But just that one lesson alone, that one basic thing, I see faces light up from child to adult to just realize, oh, there were so many things that were just happening before, but now this is easy. And once it's easy and it's enjoyable, that usually gives them that gives them that extra push to do the rest of the work that comes with really developing that stuff. But again, it's about helping them just kind of parse through and separate instinct from control. And the second we get to that portion, I've seen so many students successfully, find themselves doing things that they had no idea that they could do on the horn.
Yeah.
And I feel like that translates, that translates into other things that I see. Because again, I say it all the time. I guess I've been teaching now for about 20 years almost. It's just crazy. But with that, I've seen some students go on to be wildly successful in so many other fields. And when they come back to me and thank me for the things that I showed them on trumpet, I'm at a loss for words, because I think to myself, man, you're the one that went off and started a Fortune 500 company. But in the end, there's, and it's not just my teaching. Morehouse has a combination of amazing professors and different scholars that come in and influence these kids. But for them to even put me in that vein, just based upon what they learned on the trumpet as a contributing factor to the successes that they found in their adult life, it lets me know there's something to that connection, between life and music.
Yeah. That's great stuff. You were talking about, the differences, like the physiological differences, particularly in terms of, if you look at the different general structures of different ethnicities, and how, particularly, for Black, African American, however you want to say it, having thicker lips, having certain structures that are, the way that the teaching, the pedagogy was set up, the way the instrument was designed was not necessarily conducive to the basic setup. So, having how you have to adopt and adapt things. Because I've got, I've had a lot of problems over my career, mostly because I have a odd jaw structure. So I have an underbite, have a distinct underbite. And so the way that I approach the horn, a lot of the things that, like some of the more standard approaches to trumpet, that doesn't work for me. Now, something like the Stevens method, the Stevens Costello method, that works perfect for me, because what Roy Stevens was always talking about is like, oh, well, you want to push your lower jaw forward and you want to have a slightly lower set, and those are the things that I do naturally because of the structure of my jaw. But that creates a difference in the way that my tongue works, because the oral cavity is completely different. So I just find it interesting that you brought that up, and I just want to have you riff on that a little bit more, because I think there are so many players out there that are running into difficulties because, unfortunately, they're not blessed with having a teacher like you that has this more global concept of what it means to be a trumpet player and to be a teacher. So, what kind of advice would you give to people in terms of, like, going back with that self-analysis and playing around with stuff? What are some of the tips that you would give to people that are maybe not finding the more traditional methodologies working for them?
All right. There's and I'm glad you said what you said for a couple of reasons, because I know I remember you mentioning that in your particular heritage, you have a mixture of both Black and Mexican background. I think what's interesting is that you will find that dialect even makes a huge difference with how you play the instrument. I know a lot of times people attribute, like some of the mariachi musicians or even some of the South American musicians, some of the things that they play in terms of range and interpretation. A lot of that has to do with the language itself, with words that they're already accustomed to saying, which is, is different than the English language, which is different than the French language. Like some of that French literature is crazy. Yeah. But even that dialect, what you have to do with your tongue when you're speaking makes a huge difference with how it's going to play out on the instrument. But you brought up a bunch of really interesting points. When we're talking about physiology, your oral cavity makes a huge difference. And one of the greatest examples of this to me is probably John Faddis. Faddis has that. He has the gap between his two top teeth there. Mm-hmm. And he tells a story that's hilarious. He played with that for years, and that does something different for him in terms of just shooting the air through the instrument. And that's one of the things that he always attributes to his range and his durability with that. And he said, after years and years of having that particular feature, he decided to go to an oral surgeon, to get that corrected. And he said after it was corrected, after they remolded his smile, he could no longer play. So he had to go back to the doctor to get them to regap so that he can maintain that. So I'm saying that because there are other players who don't have that feature who can still do some of the things that Faddis does. When it comes to an individual's players, you have to discover your own strengths and your own weaknesses. There's a possibility that playing center and downstream is not going to work with you simply because of what's going on back here behind your teeth. And for me, I've never been a complete on-center player because I dabbled in boxing when I was in high school, which was a bad idea as a trumpet player. But, that was the thing I did. And as a result, we all know the scar tissue does not buzz. Mm-hmm. So my embouchure had to adjust to account for the tissue that just could not be involved in playing. And once I discovered the thing that worked for me, I've always found that once a student finds their strengths, if it's not something that's detrimental, the best thing a teacher can do for that student is learn how to work with that. But the second we start getting into embouchure changes, it's not always worth the setback that comes with it, because you could literally discourage a student from playing completely over that setback. The idea is to understand, though, if like you say with the underbite, if you have that thing going on, then you just have to adjust your mouthpiece, your position to account for what you're doing here, unless you're, die hard and want to get some kind of surgical fix, which I don't think is necessary, because great players, they're not made the same. They're just not. It's just a fact of nature. And when we look in even the classical realm now, I see the players whose bells are directed, down here, but they sound great and they do amazing things on horns. And I see the upstream players, and it's just another debate that doesn't change anything in the end. Mm-hmm. What you do is you just figure out your strengths and you figure out the most effective way to move the air into the instrument. And the common denominator that I found often has to do with mouthpiece size. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, the trumpet, you get your first trumpet, it comes with a 7C mouthpiece. Again, that was made for a specific person that was considered to be standard when that was standardized. Right. But once you do start dealing with other features, I've had some students who've experienced a huge shift in their playing just by switching to a wider rim so that they can deal with more of the flesh of their embouchure being involved in the buzz. It changes their sound, it changes durability, that changes flexibility, and all of that is just that's a simple fix. That's a quick fix. So I think, when we're dealing with Black people, another thing that happens is we generally don't get a lot of private instruction before college when it comes to the instrument. That's not a standard when it comes to younger Black students. So by the time I see students here at Morehouse or at a lot of the high schools that I would travel to do clinics and lessons, I kind of have to supplement that. Because when I worked for other institutions, the freshmen came in with a repertoire list, mm-hmm. with an etude list, with a list of books and different studies from different countries, and they were ready to move beyond that. But sometimes when I receive students, even here, I find that we have to not necessarily play catch up, as much as supplement the things that they would have learned from those books to give them the opportunity to explore those books. Mm-hmm. And with that, the realization is that, hey, man, that leg up that we perceive with them is literally meant to be a motivation for us. Yeah. When it comes to most things, we feel like we have to be twice as good, twice as fast, right. Twice as attentive. And it's no different when it comes to trumpet. You have to understand that now that you have twice the material to work with here on your face, you're going to have to adjust some things to get the same results. And mouthpiece size, that's the first thing. Once you figure out how much of your embouchure is supposed to go in there and how much of the rest of your facial, tissue is supposed to contribute to what is in there, that's when you start playing. That's really the beginning.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That's cool because, I think